Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That was a very long shoot. You told me 150 days. You were there for most of that film, but not at the very beginning of it. Can you tell the story about how you were in Florida when they already started shooting Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
Yeah, absolutely. David started that movie almost immediately after we were out of Social Network, and we had actually talked about various stages of approaches to it, but when it came down to it, because it was a Swedish movie, a Swedish story, a Swedish movie recently released the year prior, Swedish money from a Swedish novel, that, and in Sweden, that not to be the big giant that comes in and takes over a story that wasn't ours to start with. They tried with all possibility to make it as inclusive as possible and to use as much of the Swedish crew as possible and keep it as much Swedish as allowed. And so they went in with the best intentions. Unfortunately, a few weeks into production shooting, they didn't see eye to eye, and David decided that in the interest of the project and that it was such a long film, that they needed to make a change. So I actually was on my way to Manhattan Beach Studios for a commercial shoot at about 6 in the morning, and the phone rang, and I saw the name, and I knew it wasn't to find out how the weather was down here. It's pretty much a given as soon as I answered that phone what was going to happen. I'd already...
It was the first AD who was...
Yeah, it was Bob Wagner, the first AD. He was like, hey, what's your schedule look like for the next 9 months? You know, and I'm like, excellent. I'd already committed to your point, I'd already committed to a commercial. My brother and I co-direct commercials together, and I couldn't get out of that obligation, so we went from here to Miami, shot 3 days on a golf course in Miami, and then met David and Sion and Bob in Zurich to scout. Scouted 2 days and started shooting on Monday in Stockholm.
And it went on for like 160 days.
Just under 160 days.
Yeah. Wow. Now you had worked with David many times before. Which films? Which was the first film you did with him?
The first film, actually, my father and I started. It was called Aliens 3, and as many of you know, my father was a cinematographer as well. Jordan Cronenweth. He had Parkinson's disease, and when we got to England and started production, the studio felt that with his illness that we wouldn't be able to keep up, we'd fall behind, so they, let us go. And so that was the first project. He and I had actually shot a music video called "Oh Father" for Madonna with David, which was the first time the three of us had met.
Yeah.
Then I went on I shot second unit on 7, on The Game. Thought I was shooting second unit on Fight Club. I was wrong, thankfully. And then ended up shooting Social Network and Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah. So obviously you and David have a good collaborative relationship with each other. Do you think that's why he called you when he was in Sweden?
Yeah, I think it was twofold. You know, we just had an amazing experience on Social Network, and we're very successfully visually. I hope you guys agree. I thought it was, and we speak a very common visual language, which is imperative in a relationship with the cinematographer and the director. I think it was a really easy transition, and we're friends, and it was a difficult thing to do. No one really ever wants to take over for someone else. It's always an awkward moment, and you worry about any kind of leftover feelings that might be there, and it went very smoothly, actually.
And you already knew some of the department heads who were on that film?
Yeah, there was very many people from Social Network had been there, or from other projects that we'd all done together. So getting integrated and coming up to speed was fairly easy. Plus, we utilize a system called PIX, which is it's an integrated software that allows everybody to view certain areas of production as we go along. In other words, depending on where you are or what you need to see, dailies can become available, call sheets, script changes, all that stuff, and you can watch from your laptop. And so prior to me even getting there, I had seen all the footage they'd already shot. So I was pretty well up to speed both on what had been accomplished already, any kind of looks that had been established, and what I could then go from there, what I could change at that point.
Is PIX like a daily system? Is it primarily for viewing dailies?
Well, no, it's actually used for, you can use it for anything, any kind of, you use it for visuals as well as location photographs, script updates, call sheets, schematics of sets, an array of things.
And during those 160 days, I mean, how many of them were in Stockholm or Sweden, and how many of them were in other places?
I don't have the exact, I can't give you the exact breakdown, but I can tell you fundamentally what the schedule was. You know, as you guys know, if you've seen the movie, it takes place over a year, and so it was imperative for us to actually witness the 4 different seasons, because they are so dramatically different there in Sweden. And we started in October of, what was it? 2011, I guess. No, it couldn't have been 2010. And it's a long movie. And shot up to a couple weeks before Christmas, went on to Zurich and shot all of the financial district stuff in Zurich. Came back to Los Angeles for the Christmas break. Shot all the set interiors that we had built, including something here at LA Center, the Bangor Mansion where he meets Chris Plummer, and that entire set, all the interiors were here over on one of the stages they have here. And then shot another 2.5 months at Paramount on the backlot, not the backlot, not the stages. And because we wanted these different times, we had these different phases. So phase 2 of Sweden, on the way back, we stopped in London and shot for a couple of weeks the end of the movie where they find out who Harriet is and all that kind of detective work he does. It ends slightly different from the Swedish movie. The Swedish version of that movie ended on Australia, but the book ended in England, and we followed more closely to the book. Then we went back to Sweden for about 4 months, and then we came back to LA, went to 1 week in Oslo, and then back to Sweden to finish up. So it was a bit of
What about the post-production and the DI work?
The DI work didn't start for several months after that. You know, David puts all his cut together, and I mean, he's pretty efficient cutting all throughout, obviously. So it's not quite as long a normal process as it would be when he's done, but it's still with all the final touches, and there was some visual effects work, and it took about, let's say, 10 days of DI work.
And you were there, obviously.
Yeah.
Talk about the production itself and the acquisition system. You started with the Red 1 camera, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we shot the Red 1 on Social Network and really had a good experience with it. And so when Dragon Tattoo came along, David was sold and committed to that. We stayed on it probably for about 80% of the picture, but towards the end of the movie, the Epic came out, and when we came back to the United States and actually had access to cards, because there was a shortage when it was first introduced, we slowly migrated into using it. So I'd say about 20% of the movie was on the Red Epic.
So towards the end you used the Epic?
Yeah.
And was there anything you had to do to the images to reconcile them between the...
Well, it's much easier to downgrade or down-res something that is obviously than to up, and so we didn't find any problem converting, one to our matching looks or matching scenes. We didn't really shoot anything that had to be cut directly together. We didn't break up a sequence with an epic shot. However, I would have had no problem migrating the two together.
Now, have you used other digital cameras in addition to the Red?
Yeah, I've used them all. Not on anything longer than say a commercial or a music video, but I have used the F65 and I have used the Alexa. I have used an array of other cameras depending on what it was we were trying to accomplish, but most of the long form stuff has all been on the Reds.
What do you think of film these days? I know you shot a lot of film in the past, and what's your preference?
I don't really have a preference. I think that if you find the medium that best serves that story or allows you to best tell that story, considering all the choices that would dictate that, for example, economically, geographically, where you end up, weather conditions, but primarily what the story is and how it wants to be told. I'm not sure I answered you, but there's pros and cons to both mediums, and we're seeing the infancy stage of digital photography, and it has a way to grow. But it's pretty darn close, and there's a lot of advantages to it that eventually perhaps will make it more relative than film, at least in our journey from this point forward. It will never replace the history of film or what film gave us for all these years, but when you start bringing up things like security and piracy and environmental concerns about what do you do with 3,500 prints when you're done with the movie's run and all those kind of things, then there could be an argument for the digital versions.
Mm-hmm. You've said to me in the past that one of your beefs with film is the fact that you go to one theater, you see it one way, you go to another theater, you see it differently, whereas you don't have that so much with digital.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much the beef with what you choose to capture. How it's projected or how it's displayed. And for me, what's always been a frustrating process is you spend, in a traditional format, you go into a DI suite now and you time your movie for how long you're afforded to. But traditionally, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, and you get your film.
Not bad. 48.
Depending on how it's being distributed on.
It's like about Zoom,
either
H4n,
digitally or through prints. The margin of error or the variances in prints, regardless of how much the labs invest, still seems to vary quite a bit, as does the projectors that we use to project them on. And so when you go from screening room A to screening room B, or for worse, when you go to Theater 1 and Theater 7 at the Cineplex, and they look completely different, it kind of dispels why you would invest all that time and energy and money into making it so close when in fact it doesn't have a chance to do that. Now, having said that, if you don't invest that, it'll be even worse. But the thing about digital projection, if you will, is that it's pretty close to the way you last saw it every time. Barring some life expand on the globe itself, or any kind of imperfections, but they all pretty much give you back the way you need it from the DIC.
Have you done any 3D work?
Only some tests. I'm not an expert in it at all. I've played around with it. I've been to a couple different systems. I've shot some concert films in 3D, but I wouldn't call myself knowing it very well at all.
Would you like to shoot a film in 3D feature?
If I had a choice of yes or no, or if there was an A and a B, I would pick no. But it's inevitable, it seems, and it's coming, and I do like the challenge in it, and I would love the experience, absolutely.
I spoke to Bob Richardson before he won his Oscar, obviously, and he told me
he won.
Yeah. He told me he was apprehensive about 3D. That was the first time he had shot a feature in 3D.
I mean, if you've read his article in the ASC when he describes about it, it was kind of daunting for him at first, and all the equipment and losing what he perceived to be some control. But obviously, everything he's used is pretty phenomenal, and he mastered that as well as he's mastered anything. And then when you read further on, he got the system down, and they really got into a rhythm, and it didn't seem to, they seem to jump a lot of the hurdles that traditionally, how long it takes to switch lenses, how big the units are, how they limit camera movement. He loves to operate himself, so that becomes an issue depending on what kind of moves you're doing. But they seem to overcome those hurdles.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of operating oneself, what's your approach to that?
I love having camera operators on the set. I think it's an important role that we need, and I love the contributions. I don't know how much you know the background of David Fincher or David Fincher movies, but ever since Fight Club, that hasn't really been a choice of mine. He always tries to shoot two cameras. He's very, very clever about positioning those two cameras so that it doesn't compromise the visuals, which is always the risk you take, and or the eye lines, but he's such a master at it, that we end up using two cameras about 90% of the time, and that's Fight Club, Social Network, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It's become less of the problem it was for me on Fight Club. On Fight Club, at first, it was my first feature, and I was rather anxious to say the least about it. And to be lighting and using low levels and petrified that there's not enough light in Brad Pitt's eyes, and then still trying to follow someone around and, you know, looking out from the eyepiece trying to see if there's a twinkle there and clipping him and then getting yelled at, and, you know, like, God damn, I don't want to be doing this, you know, I want to be looking to see that, you know, someone else should be doing this. But as economics have it, and, you know, you make compromises, and that's part of the deal when we work together. So that's not as relevant now when you can go back and watch, you know, playback that is fairly accurate now that we're shooting, you know, digitally.
Who are some of your favorite cinematographers?
Well, my father, first of all, Jordan, you know, I mean, I grew up with all what I consider the guys that were coming out of the hardest parts and had the most inventive opportunities and told some of the brightest stories. And the Conrad Halls of the world, Gordon Willis, Vittorio Storaro, and then some guys in the next generation, the younger guys that I actually worked for and then became, you know, contributors with them. The John Tolles and the Roger Deakins and Janusz and Chibo and those guys are phenomenal.
Yeah, you've also worked with Sven Nykvist, right?
I have, yes, indeed. There's a tie-in to that because as a camera assistant and as an operator, I had the luxury of doing 7 films with Sven Nykvist. And as I've said before, you know, I never got to go to Sweden while I was working with him. And he's since passed away before Dragon Tattoo was made. But as my father always explained to me, Sven, when he first came and started shooting in the United States, he by no means did he invent soft light, but he brought a style of soft light that we hadn't really seen so much of before. And when talking to him about where that came from, he simply would say, you know, it's the type of light in Sweden. We shoot 2 people in a window talking, drinking 2 teacups. And it's the light coming through the windows, and it's cloudy, and it's cold, and it's soft, and that's the kind of style he grew up with. That's the quality of light he learned photography under, and that's what he brought to us. And so, for me, very first day off the plane in Stockholm and lining up a shot and taking in the quality of the light, I was like, I get it. It's exactly what it was. So, you know, and you can see in the clip that you saw earlier, it's soft and cool and cold and, you know, shadowless, and I think that all I had to do is not screw that up.
Yeah. Well, you grew up in a very different kind of place. You grew up in Malibu, right?
What's that?
You
Where I grew up?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Very different life.
Quite different than that. Yeah, different life.
What was it like growing up in Malibu as the son of a cinematographer? I mean, were there a lot of film people around all the time?
There was film people around, but you know, it was all cinematographers, camera operators, camera assistants. I mean, I went to school with a lot of kids that were actors or celebrities now, and I think you talk more about them than you would any of us. But I thought it was it was a really good group of interesting people. And if you don't mind if I segue for a second, one of the things that when I used to visit sets that I thought was so intriguing was at that time there was not a long lineage of people that had come from either film schools or had grown up in the business to be cameramen or grips or electricians or assistant directors. They had all come from other really unique backgrounds to arrive at this position. So you would have, you know, rigging guys that were mountain climbers that someone saw on a Western with John Wayne that asked them to do something that then became a grip. And so it was this whole eclectic group of carnies that were all making these great movies and were just amazing characters. You know, I don't think that we're any less qualified to make movies now than they were, but our backgrounds have been more educated or more focused, or we come from film as opposed to having, you know, a broader element that they used to bring with them. And I always thought that was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Now, you went to film school, right?
I did.
And do you think that's a good path for someone to take who wants to break into business?
It depends on how you want to get there, or how long you want to get there, or what's the most interesting to you. The film schools now I don't believe any of them shoot film anymore, which I would have thought would have been a mandate, at least to get the fundamentals of it down before everybody goes into this digital capture world. But again, it's different now, because one of the beautiful things about going to film school then, it was before the internet, is that it was the only way to see some of the classic movies that have existed, or to get a history of movies. And so I think you have access to everything now. So for me, it was those things, but also growing up. You know, if you were not a young adult, if you don't need that few extra years to figure out what you want to do in life, or to mature as a human being, then I don't know how relevant it is, other than getting to practice your craft without the same pressures that you do in the real world.
I got more questions, but I'm sure the audience has questions as well. So I would like to open it up, because you guys must have something you want to ask. So I can't see too well, but I'll start there, then I'll go there. So the gentleman on the end.
Jeff,
There's a mic coming your way.
The scene in Dragon Tattoo, the chase scene, after she's clobbered the guy with a golf club. Could you talk a little bit how that was, the lighting that you implemented that? It looks beautiful. I mean, the shots through the trees and all that, and a little bit about that sequence.
Sure. That was actually the first day I landed in Stockholm. Some of the chase stuff we shot that very first night, so it was a little bit overwhelming to get into that. But the theory behind behind David picking that narrow forest was because, one, you would feel the speed so much, you would feel the tension and the action, and also if there was an ability to actually generate light, or to motivate light from the motorcycle itself or from the Range Rover, that it was mildly believable that would actually light that corridor. So that was the theory. And so what we would do is, when we were chasing the motorcycle, oftentimes we had extra lights on the bike itself that that her body would block, that would then be projecting forward. And in our chase vehicle, which had the camera on it, I would use narrow beams to project above her head down, say 100, 200 feet, and just have an ever so slight bit of texture to the trees as you're approaching. And it's so far away, and there's so much action going on, and it's snowing, that you really don't sell it. I mean, it doesn't give itself away that it's front light, or that it's not coming from the ambience in the world. And so that was kind of going that direction, and then we did similar things coming the other way. We had bounce cars. We used the motorcycle light itself sometimes when she'd be driving at us to light a card, so that when she would swerve back and forth, it would change the type of light on her face, which makes sense if you're chasing someone from behind. I also, when we were running sometimes, and the car wasn't there, I would just bounce lights into the asphalt, which doesn't put out very much light, as we know, but it does have some effect, and it does have motion to it, and you would get that in the reflections, you get that in the bike, and sometimes depending on a white line or a little bit of snow, it'd pop up. It just gave more energy to that type of shot.
Another question over on this side.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Of course.
We tend to focus a lot on the physicality of lighting in camera. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to psychology and to point of view?
Well, I think it's pretty simple for me. It depends on the story, and it's all based on the story. And how can I enhance the written word and/or what the director's interpretation of that is, through light, or through camera placement, or through exposure. And if there's a way of imputing more of that experience without getting in the way of it, I'm all for it. Otherwise, just let the story be it, and keep your palette as pure as you can. I don't think I really answered your question, but.
Any other questions out there? There's a gentleman over here.
Thank you. I noticed in the interior scene in Dragon Tattoo, the windows, you were letting that go. Was that by default because you were on a soundstage, or is it because you were letting that light be kind of what felt like the only light source?
Okay. No, never letting it go. We owned all that light and just decided how much we wanted to be overexposed. Obviously, that was the motivation for the light that was in the room, and that justified it. But unfortunately, and still to this day, the amount of light that you can generate from a source like that, by the time it actually gets to your subject, isn't enough to not stop those windows from being so bright there's no detail, or they're so underexposed. Something that's happening, I mean, with film, there was always an enormous amount of latitude, and there would always be some detail in there. However, they would still be very, very overexposed. One thing that digital technology is bringing to us now is and the Red Epic has a setting called HDRX, which allows you to have your normal range of exposures and to do a parallel track that's one frame off, that you can have 3 stops more of latitude one way or the other. So in theory, you could have your windows lighting the subject and still bring them 3 stops of density back so they're not so ripping out, and then use actual window light to expose your actor. But I didn't try that yet.
Can you hand the mic to the gentleman on your left?
Hello, I know that David Fincher is known for being an incredibly visual director, maybe more so than most. How do you as a cinematographer work with a director who obviously has very specific probably ideas about camera placement and lighting and all of those things? What do you do to bring your vision to aid his?
Well, it's been my experience with every director that you have to find your niche within them and figure out what it is that you're going to contribute. And someone like David, who is actually as clever a guy I've ever met and knows every aspect of this craft so well, you find what your contributions can be within that, and then work towards it. And you always fight to try to bring more to it. There's never a day when it's an absolute and everything's given. You constantly keep to support him and try to get more ideas, or open his eyes to other possibilities, or push light from different directions. And he, as visual as he is, he'll want your idea of it, and then if it's not what he wants, or it doesn't work, or somehow it doesn't make sense to him aesthetically or emotionally for the scene, then there'll be a conversation about it and we'll change it. But going into it, he's pretty open-minded.
Let's see, there's a question in the middle and a question on that side over there.
Do you ever find yourself, when lighting a sequence or a scene, that despite the pre-production revisuals where something in your gut says something different and you have to pull a 180, you ever find yourself up against where your instincts are conflicted, and do you have a mechanism or a train of thought that sort of take you and help guide those like on the day, those moments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it happens every day, all day. You go into something where you've read the script, you've scouted with the director, you scouted with the rest of your technical team to go through everything. You've rehearsed that morning, blocked out the scene, and then something's different, or something's changed, or the actors have evolved, or you're better in tune with it, or that scene means something different than it did before. Or there's something in the set that you didn't notice that now is a catalyst for some kind of light source that then plays into, both emotionally and photographically giving back. So I think you'd be a fool not to. I mean, you don't want to get caught not knowing. You can't go in every day and say, what are we going to paint today? You've got to have a plan and then have all your pieces in place. You just don't have enough time in the day to kind of make it up as you go. But that's not to say you can't have everything in place so that when those things come up, or when you feel something different, or when something magic happens, which is the whole beautiful thing that we do, that you can jump on it.
Hi, Jeff. Over here. Hi. Can you talk a little bit about how your lighting instruments might have changed as you switch from shooting negative to digital? And also, can you tell the true story of the Cronenweth?
There's a few people here that could tell a better story about it than me, but okay. Well, you still end up using the same tools. You still have to have your light meters. You still have to read light and set levels, and maybe they're a little broader than they used to be. And you have to look at your waveform monitor, and you have to see colors, and you have to see if you're clipping or not, and if the toe, and if you're too underexposed, and that kind of stuff. But for all intensive purposes, it's all still the same. If it's a big scene, you're going to need big lights. You know, it's not, and it doesn't shrink proportionately. And so, I don't think it's changed that much. There's a little bit in the mind that you have to readjust in that you can't have the high end be as high, and you see a lot deeper into the lower end. So you end up taking away light sometimes where you wouldn't, and trying to, you know, or to preserve blacks or to create shadow or contrast, where in the past that you had worried about that and needed to fill something, because as in film, when there's nothing exposed, it goes black, or it gets grain in it. The opposite is when in digital cinematography, if you overexpose something, once you get to where it's clipping, there's zero information after that. So once you kind of figure out those things and a few little color things in the middle, it's the same.
And there was a question there. There's two questions in the middle there.
Hi, I was wondering, for Dragon Tattoo, how much of the book influenced your imagination?
Asking that question to me?
Yes.
0, I never read the book.
Thank you.
No, but to tell you, here's a little antidote to that. One, I had seen the Swedish movie before I was even aware of the book's success. So, and before I had been hired to do the movie. Then, when I got invited to join, of course I was going to pick up the book, but then I was reading the script, and then I was told not to, because people that had read all 3 books, seen all 3 Swedish movies, and then had read our script, which was an adaptation by Steve Zalian, would actually get lost sometimes on what movie we're telling, or what story, or what makes sense here, is this clue from this, or didn't they already do that? Well, not in this book, they didn't already do that, they did it in that. And so, trying to be as simple as I could be, and knowing myself, I didn't read it.
Hi Jeff, it's Patrick. I met you at the Apple Store recently.
Oh yeah.
Good to see you. I was wondering if you can go over some of the lenses, some of your favorite lenses, especially with like the Alexa or with the Red Epic, especially just in terms of using the glass with the new digital cameras.
Okay, I mean, I think that there isn't a favorite lens. I think there's lenses for each story you're telling, and each movie kind of decides what it wants to be. And Fincher and I had decided early on that this movie kind of fit in these particular sizes. And I'd say that we spent a good 80% of the movie shooting on 21, 25, 28, 32, 35-ish, and maybe a 40. And that was pretty much it throughout the whole shot, or the whole shoot. We did use Master Primes, beautiful, beautiful glass. They have 7 floating elements in them, and they can be, you know, considering the weather and what you're doing and whatnot, you have to watch them, but otherwise they performed amazingly.
Jeff, I wanted to ask you, what's it like on the set working with a monitor? Do you think that's an adequate way of controlling the situation, or would you prefer to do the old-fashioned way?
Are you asking from like judging exposure, or judging color, or from operating, or from what perspective?
Judging color. Color.
I think it's a pretty good way of doing it, because I think you get really close to what you want in the end. At least that's my experience with David and I. We didn't do it traditionally. We didn't have a DIT on the set with us. We used one lookup table and kind of kept it as simple as we possibly could, making it like one film stock. And so when we changed something and when we did something different, it was our doing, and not kind of trying to chase numbers all the time and figuring out where we were. So it was real simple for us, and you know, in the end, I don't think our dailies are that different from what you saw screened. So I think it gets you there sooner, and it's closer. I mean, there's some people that might fear that it exposes us all to everybody's interpretation on the set. I don't think so. I think it just opens discussion to have a clearer point of view, and actually allows us to take more risk.
What's the worst thing that can happen on a set? What have been some of the most scariest moments?
I don't know how to answer that. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Like losing the media, for instance.
That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. You know, deleting things that you didn't want deleted. But we really didn't have anything like that. We actually didn't even drop any frames, remarkably. We shot a lot of stuff over, excuse me, over that 158 days or something. I think it would have been upwards of like the 2 million foot mark if we were shooting film. And I think maybe 1 or 2 frames were lost, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably the worst thing that no one goes to see it when it's over. I don't know.
Well, that didn't happen this time. Yeah. Any more questions? There's a question, lady towards the back there.
Hi, I got here a little late, so I don't know if you addressed this early on, but when you walk into a room in the real world, do you think about how you'd light it? I mean, someone's home or a restaurant, or in the real world, are you casting your cinematographer's eye on every space every time?
No, that's a fair question. Definitely not every time, but there are moments when you're in a restaurant or you're a hotel lobby or you're the theater starting to dim or a show, live show, some kind of musical play, that you take in all the visuals that they have, or especially if you're at a Broadway show or that type of show or Cirque du Soleil or anything like that, where they're actually using very clever tricks. You kind of like, how'd they do that? What is the source? I'm trying to figure it out, or just taking it in. But I mean, I'll pull over on the way home and watch the sunset too. But all of us do that. So I just think if something's kind and appealing and an interesting way of doing it, or a lot of restaurants will have, because they're all trying to be progressive and be the newest thing, will have sources that are unique. 20 years ago at the Shore Club, when you walked in Miami, they had white drapes hanging all over with a lamp in the middle, and you walk by and go, wow, that's really interesting. How can I use that sometime?
What do you think of the lighting in here?
From where I'm sitting, it sucks.
Yes. Question I have is, now that you can do so much in the DI process and color correction and power windows and you name it after you shoot and as you're finishing the film, are you finding that you're pre-planning for some of those, or just glad that you can change the looks afterwards?
I try to do as much as we can in camera to own it for as long as I possibly can. And I say that because you don't always know what's going to happen in the end. You don't know if the production company is going to be able to promise you the amount of time that you had to do the DI at the end. You may be in another movie and not available. You may not be talking to anybody at that point. So all those things that you thought you were putting off now are in the hands of someone that doesn't know any of what you wanted to bring to it from the beginning. So I would say situations where it's cost effective. If there's a building in the background, you need to wait an hour for the sun to move around so it's not so bright, and you could do that with the power window, and that's probably an economical choice that you would make. But other things, I think, as much as you can hold on to those images, you need to.
There was a question in front here on this side.
No, the question was already answered. That was my question.
It was answered?
Yeah.
Okay, a question over here, Nada.
What do you think when you hear a story like Kodak going Chapter 11 as a cinematographer? What are your feelings about that?
I think it's sad. I think it's really sad because, first of all, there's so much history there, and they've evolved with storytelling for us and our whole industry and photography in general, and that will never change. I always was hoping that it would just be, as digital photography advanced, that we just have one more tool in our toolbox of telling stories, and we could decide what would best serve each story. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case, but I hope they stick around as long as they possibly can. I mean, there is something still textural, tactile about film that it is you're never going to replace. I mean, you can add grain to things and you can add texture and whatever else you want to do to it, but there's something magic that's unpredictable that still happens when you shoot with film. And I would love for that to still stay around.
You know, there's a report out by the Academy called The Digital Dilemma. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but it cautions people that, you know, digital is not an adequate way of preserving images in perpetuity. It's not as good as film. So I'm just wondering what will happen in the future when we have less film, or maybe not even have film at all. How will images be preserved over the years and centuries? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's not my forte, but it's a very big concern for everybody. Certainly if you invest $100 million in a movie, you want to keep it around for a while so that you can get that investment back as many times as you possibly can, and or the history of it. And so I don't know if they're still preserving things on film. I don't know if digital movies still have to have negatives.
I think big budget movies are being transferred to film, even if they were shot digitally. But independent movies or lower budget movies, they can't afford that.
Well, it's my understanding that each, you know, as we've gone from, tape to cassette tapes to records to CDs, DVDs, each time Laserdisc, each time there's an evolution, they have the technology and preserve the technology, then they transfer that data onto the next one. And I've always been told that they always keep those doors open at all the studios, all the post house, so that they will have that ability for years to come as technology advances. I don't know if there's any fallout from any of that, but you would think the sophistication of the technology keeps making it better, and so those conversions would continue on.
Yeah, I don't know if the jury's still out on that, because with film, at least film hasn't really changed in 100 years, whereas digital technology changes every few years. So if you have to keep on transferring, then who knows when you might lose something.
It's true.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time. There's a few questions, a smattering of questions. There, the lady, Nancy?
Fantastic work, Jeff. I'm curious, since you do so much work on set, what's your monitoring? And then if for some reason you're not available, how are you preserving your looks to the post facility? And I'm assuming you are available for the DI, but how are you making sure, what kind of imagery are you sending and how are you doing it? Keep the what?
Okay, so the first question is what kind of monitors on well, that actually changes all the time depending on who's around and what you're shooting. But on the last two pictures, we had Sony HD monitors on, so about 17-inch HD monitors seem to be the truest for us, at least at that point. I made myself completely available for for Dragon Tattoo, so I didn't miss any of the DI sessions, although that's a big commitment, and in this day and age, it's still not something that we're compensated for, so you literally have to, turn down a month's worth of work to be available on the random days that they come up, because it changes all the time by completion of visual effects elements, by editorial changes, by music, so things come and go, and you time something, and then it gets layered, and you have to time it again. So it's a process, but for me, it was such a big investment, the time commitment to the movie, that I really wanted to follow through with it. On Social Network, it some parts of it, I wasn't available for it, but David has a brilliant eye. If it had been someone else, I might have more concern. But then even towards the end, the last part of it, he was off in Sweden, and I finished it. So that, because of our relationship, seemed to work out fine.
Okay, one more question. The gentleman over here.
Hi, Jeff. I'll make an assumption that you have an incredible arsenal of gear to use. For most of us who are independent filmmakers,
what was it? We're not arsenal, but
of equipment like Alexa, Red, Kodak. No. So we're using DSLR, C300, all the new equipment. Do you have an opinion on compression and using 420, 422, 444, that sort of thing? How it affects look of film?
I just think that whatever tool best serves your story at that time with whatever restrictions that story has, meaning the budget, the time, visually how expressive you can be or not, is how best to tell that story and how you want to present it later. What's the medium that you're going to show it on? And I think those things all play into it to a point that it's not easy to answer that question specifically, you know. I'm very curious to see what active valor looks like. You know, it's shot all on Canons, and I want to see how they did it, and what it, you know, and I want to see what it looks like when it's projected on a big screen and how it holds up, and if it where you find glitches or where you don't, or how they up-res or how they suppressed any kind of problems with it. I'd like to see it. I can't wait.
Well, Jeff, thanks for all the advice. I really appreciate it.